Chapter 1. The Last Day.
It's the last day, even the last hour now. I'm an old man, lonely and unloved, sick and hurting, and tired of living. I am ready for death. It has to be better than this. I own this tall glass building, the land around it, and the 2,000 people who work here. I own silver in Nevada, coffee in Kenya, and coal in Angola. My company owns businesses that produce electricity, make computers, and print books. I'm worth more than $11 billion. The money is my greatest problem. I had 3 families, 3 ex-wives, who had 7 children. They're gathering here today because I'm dying, and it's time to divide the money. I don't care who gets the money, but I do care very much who doesn't get it. My first wife was Lillian. We married young. I was 24 and she was 18, and had 4 children. Her oldest boy is now 47. Troy Jr., or TJ, was thrown out of college when he was 19 for selling drugs. I gave him, like the others, $5 million on his 21st birthday. It ran like water through his fingers. TJ's brother Rex is 44. Our oldest daughter is Libigail, a child I loved desperately until she went to college and forgot about me. She married an African, and I took her name out of my will. Our younger daughter, Mary Ross, is married to a doctor. He wants to be super rich, but they're heavily in debt. All Lillian's children are the same. They're in debt and unemployable, and they want my money. After Lillian, I married my secretary, Janie, a beautiful young thing, 22 years younger than me. She had 2 children. The younger one, Rocky, was killed in a car with 2 of his friends. Her daughter, Gina, is married to a fool who could lose $500 million in 3 years. I married Tira when I was 60. Each family has hired a psychiatrist. Their names are printed on cards in front of them. Dr. Zadell, Dr. Flo, Dr. Tyson. I study their eyes and faces. They expect me to be crazy, but I'm going to prove them wrong. Josh Stafford is speaking. My name is Josh Stafford, and I am the lawyer for Mr. Troy Phelan. The psychiatrists in this room will examine Mr. Phelan. If they believe that he is wholly sane, then he intends to sign a new will. Stafford taps his pencil on the thick will lying before us. My families haven't seen the will, so they can only guess what it contains. They believe that the money will be divided fairly among the children, with generous gifts to my ex-wives. Stafford prepared the will, and, with my permission, this is what he has implied. The psychiatrists begin their examination. Zadell goes first. Mr. Phelan, can you tell us the date, time, and place? I drop my chin to my chest like a fool and think about the question. Monday, December 9th, 1996. The place is my office. The time? About 2:30 in the afternoon, I say. And where is your office? McLean, Virginia. They ask many more questions. Then Tyson says, What is your current physical condition? I'm sick. I have cancer. My doctors say I won't live more than 3 months. I can feel their excitement. The rumor has been confirmed. Are you under the influence of drugs or alcohol? No. Back to Zadell. Mr. Phelan, you have about $11 billion. Is that correct? Yes. Do you intend to sign a new will today? Yes, I do. Is that the will on the table in front of you? It is. Does that will leave a large part of your estate to your children? It does. Zadell places his pen on the table and looks at Stafford. In my opinion, Mr. Phelan is mentally capable of signing his will. Do you all—
Chapter 2. Troy Phelan's Testament. Sneed reached the balcony just in time to scream in horror. Then he watched helplessly as Mr. Phelan fell silently, growing smaller and smaller until he struck the ground. Sneed stared in disbelief. Then he began to cry. Josh Stafford was a step behind him and witnessed most of the fall. It took him a minute or two to recover from the shock and start thinking like a lawyer again. He watched the family down below collect around Phelan's body. Then he went back into the room. The camera was still on. Sneed faced it, raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, then explained what he'd just witnessed. Stafford opened the envelope and held the yellow sheets of paper close enough for the camera to see. Yes, I saw him sign that, Sneed said, just seconds ago. Did he say this was his last will and testament? He called it his testament. Stafford made Durbin repeat the same statement, then placed himself in front of the camera and gave his version of events. When he finished, he told Sneed to leave the room. Stafford turned back to the camera and looked at the sheets of yellow paper. The first sheet was a letter. Stafford spoke to the camera. This letter is dated today, Monday, December 9th, 1996. It is addressed to me from Troy Phelan. I will read it in full. Dear Josh, I am dead now. These are my instructions, and I want you to follow them closely. First, I want a quick examination of my body. Second, there will be no funeral. I want to be cremated and my ashes scattered from the air over my ranch in Wyoming. Third, I want you to keep my will secret until January 15th, 1997. The law does not require you to produce it immediately. Goodbye. Troy. Stafford carefully picked up the second piece of paper. This is a one-page document. It is the last testament of Troy L. Phelan. I will read it all. The last testament of Troy L. Phelan. To each of my children, Troy Phelan, Jr., Rex Phelan, Libigail Jeter, Mary Ross Jackman, Gina Strong, and Ram. The following day, Stafford met Tip Durbin, and together they drove to the medical examiner's office in McLean. The cause of death is obvious. There's no trace of alcohol or drugs, the medical examiner said. And there was no sign of cancer. Troy was in good health at the time of his death. Did he tell you he had cancer? Durbin asked Stafford on the drive back. Yes, several times. Why did he lie? Who knows? Everybody thought he was dying. Why did he jump? He was a very lonely old man. It seems like a nasty trick, Durbin said. He promises money to his family. The psychiatrists say that he isn't crazy. Then at the last minute he signs a different will. Why did he hate them so much? They embarrassed him.
They fought with him. They never earned an honest dime, and they spent many of his millions. Troy never planned to leave them anything.
Back at his office, Stafford talked to members of his team.
You have to find a person who, I suspect, does not want to be found.
He told them what he knew about Rachel Lane. There wasn't much.
First, find out about the World Tribes missions. Who are they? How do they operate? How do they pick their people? Where do they send them? Everything. Find out about her mother, Evelyn Cunningham. She's dead now. Find out all you can.
TJ nursed a sore head until noon, then drank a beer. He walked around his dirty apartment. He couldn't find his wife. He and Biff had been through 3 fights already that day. He opened another beer and looked at himself in the mirror in the hall.
Troy Phelan, Jr., he said. Son of Troy Phelan, 10th richest man in America, worth $11 billion. Yes!
He dressed in his best suit, a gray one he'd worn yesterday when dear old Dad faced the psychiatrists and performed so wonderfully.
Armani, here I come,
he whistled joyfully. Life had been soft and luxurious for the first 20 years, and then he received his inheritance. His $5 million had disappeared before he reached 30, and his father hated him for it.
What can I do with $500 million? He asked himself as he drove along the highway.
Gina Phelan Strong was 30 and married to Cody, husband number 2. He had big dreams, but after 6 months, his businesses had made huge losses. The $5 million Troy gave Gina on her 21st birthday had shrunk to less than $1 million, and their debts were growing. Then Troy jumped from the window. They spent the morning looking for homes in Swink's Mill, the place of their grandest dreams. By dusk, they were looking at an empty house priced at $4.5 million, and seriously considering making an offer. Rex, age 44, brother of TJ, was under criminal investigation. A bank had failed, and the FBI was making fierce inquiries. He owed more than $7 million. Now Troy was dead, Rex could stop worrying. He could pay his debts and play with his money. He spent the day with Hark Geddes, his lawyer. He wanted the money quickly, desperately, and he pressured Geddes to call Josh Stafford.
"We have to see that will,"
he shouted at Hark throughout the day. Hark calmed him with a long lunch and good wine. Amber, Rex's wife, dropped by and found them both drunk. She wasn't angry. She loved Rex more than ever now. Hark Geddes was excited. The old man was dead, and his crazy family was a lawyer's dream. This was his chance to start his own company and to make a lot of money. He wanted a long fight over the will, a fight that would make him famous and rich. According to the Internet, the World Tribes Mission's headquarters was in Houston, Texas. Their goal was to spread Christianity around the world, and they had 4,000 missionaries working with native peoples. 28 Indian tribes in Brazil were being ministered to by World Tribes missionaries. These missionaries received training in living in the jungle, languages, and medical skills. So Rachel lived in a hut and slept on a bed she'd built herself and cooked over a fire. She ate food she'd grown or trapped and killed, and taught Bible stories to the children and the adults. She knew nothing and certainly cared nothing for the worries and pressures of the world.
"We may never find her,"
Durbin said. Chapter 3. Nate's Mission. Nate walked to his window and looked at the Shenandoah Valley 1,000 meters below. It was covered with new snow. He remembered that it was almost Christmas, and the thought saddened him. The kids were gone now, either grown or taken away by their mothers. The last thing Nate wanted was another Christmas in a bar with other drunks. Breakfast was black coffee, which he had with his nurse, Sergio. For the last 4 months, Sergio had also been his best friend. He knew everything about the miserable life of Nate O'Reilly. "Do you have a guest today? Mr. Stafford," Sergio said. "Wonderful." Josh had visited once a month. Nate was resting in his room when Josh arrived. "You look great," Josh said. "How you doing?" "I need to get out of here, Josh." "Your doctor says another week or 2. "Great. Then what? Can I come back to the company?" "Not so fast, Nate. You have a couple of problems. We can deal with the bankruptcy, but that still leaves the problem of your taxes." From 1992 to 1995, Nate had failed to report about $60,000 in other income. "So what am I supposed to do?" Nate asked. "Do you think I'm going to prison?" "Troy Phelan died," Josh said, and it took Nate a second to understand. "I didn't know. When did he die?" 4 days ago. Jumped out of a window. He'd just signed 2 wills. The first prepared by me, the second and last he wrote himself. Then he jumped. He left everything to an illegitimate daughter I've never heard of. I want you to find her." "Me?" "Yes. We don't know where she is." "How much did he—" "About $11 billion before taxes." "Does she know it?" "No, she doesn't even know he's dead." "Where is she?" "Brazil, we think. She's a missionary working with a tribe of Indians." "How long will I be gone?" Nate asked. "It's a wild guess, but I'd say 10 days. There's no hurry, and she might be hard to find." "What part of the country?" "West, near Bolivia. This mission she works for said..." The Phelan case landed on the desk of Judge F. Parr Wycliffe. He was thrilled to get such a famous lawsuit, and called Josh Stafford to introduce himself. "Is there a will?" Wycliffe asked. "Yes, there's a will." "Where is it? When will the money be released?" "I have it," Josh said. "My client asked me to wait until January 15th. "Why?" The reason was simple. Troy wanted his greedy children to spend a lot of money before they found out he hadn't left them anything. "I have no idea," Josh said. "What's in the will?" "I can't tell you." "I'm a little sympathetic to the Phelan family," Wycliffe said. "They have a right to know what's in the will. I think we should read it to them on December 27th. Josh wanted to laugh. Gather them all together, the Phelans and their lawyers and their new friends. Make sure the newspapers know about it. He could hear the crying and the cursing as the Phelans tried to understand what their father had done to them. Suddenly, Josh couldn't wait. "The 27th's fine with me," he said. "Good," Wycliffe said. "I'll let everybody know. There are lots of lawyers. It helps if you remember that there are 6 kids and 3 ex-wives, so there are 9 principal sets of lawyers. I hope my courtroom is big enough." "I suggest you read the will," Josh said. Wycliffe intended to. He imagined what would happen. People crowded together, not a sound as the envelope was opened. This would be one of his finest moments, reading a will that gave away $11 billion. "I assume the will is interesting," the judge said. "It's very interesting." The judge actually smiled. As usual, Josh had carefully planned Nate's release. He arrived at the hospital with a bag full of clothes, a passport, tickets, and plenty of cash. "How do you feel?" Josh asked as they drove south. "Could you stop at the nearest store?" "Sure. Why?" "I'd like to get some beer." "Very funny." "I'd kill for a tall Coca-Cola." Back in the car, Josh said, "Your flight goes to Sao Paulo. Then you'll go on to a city called..." Chapter 4. Into the Pantanal. Valdir Ruiz was a pleasant man, happy with life in the way most Brazilians tend to be. He worked efficiently in his small office, just him and a secretary. He was proud of his English. He produced a large air map and pointed to the Pantanal. No roads or highways. More than 100,000 kilometers of swamp. There were 4 red X's along the western edge of the map, near Bolivia. "There are tribes here," he said to Nate, pointing to the marks. "Guató and Ipicas." "How large are they?" Nate asked. "We don't really know," Valdir replied. His words very slow and careful. He was trying hard to impress the American with his English. 100 years ago, there were many more, but the tribes grow smaller. They have little contact with the outside world. Their culture hasn't changed for 1,000 years. Do we know where the missionaries are? It is difficult to say. Valdir pointed at 2 of the X's. These are Guató. There will probably be missionaries around here. You must understand that there are at least 20 different American and Canadian groups with missionaries in Brazil. It's easy to get into our country, and it's easy to move around. No one really cares who is out there and what they are doing. Nate pointed at Corumbá, then to the nearest red X. How long does it take to get from here to there? By plane, about an hour. By boat, from 3 to 5 days. Then where's my plane? It's not that easy, Valdir said. He pointed. These are cattle farms. Only a few can be reached by boat, so they use small airplanes. The airstrips are marked in blue. Even if you flew into the area, you would have to use a boat to get to the Indians. How good are the airstrips? They're all grass. Sometimes they cut the grass, sometimes they don't. The biggest problem is cows. Cows? Yes, cows like grass. Sometimes it's hard to land because the cows are eating the airstrip. Could I fly into the Pantanal, then rent? He thanked Valdir and left the office. He walked toward the river and found a small park. The late afternoon was humid. His shirt was stained with sweat and stuck to his chest. What happened back at Valdir's office had scared him. He sat on the edge of a picnic table and looked at the great Pantanal lying before him. A musician began to play his guitar as the sun sank slowly over the Bolivian mountains, not far away. A pilot agreed to fly, but he wanted to leave early and be back in Corumbá by noon because it was Christmas Eve. Valdir had hired a guide called Javi. He was 24, single and strong. He ran into the Palace Hotel wearing a bush hat, shorts, black army boots, and a shiny knife in his belt. Nate liked him immediately. His truck was old, but ready for the jungle. They roared through the streets of Corumba, slowing only slightly at red lights, completely ignoring stop signs. JV talked as he held the wheel like a race driver. Nate didn't hear a word. His heart stopped at each new intersection. The airport was empty. The pilot's name sounded like Milton. He was friendly enough, but it was obvious he didn't want to fly or work on the day before Christmas. "Do you feel safe?" Nate asked JV when the pilot announced he was ready. JV laughed and said, "No problem. This man has 4 small children and a pretty wife. Why would he risk his life?" Corumba was immediately beneath them. To the east and north, a dozen small rivers spun circles around and through each other. Because of the floods, the rivers were full, and in many places ran together. In the west were the distant mountains of Bolivia. The sky was darker beyond the mountains. Milton dropped to 4,000 meters to stay below the clouds. He was worried about the dark sky. "We'll watch it for a few minutes," JV said. Milton wanted to go home, but Nate at least wanted to see the Indian villages. He still held the faint hope that he could somehow fly to meet Rachel and take her back to Corumba, where they could have lunch in a nice cafe and discuss her father's case. Raindrops began hitting. Chapter 5. The Slide. Nate woke up covered in blood. It was still raining. Milton and JV were lying on top of each other, but moving and struggling to get out of their seats. Nate found a window and stuck his head out. The plane was on its side, with a wing cracked and folded under the cabin. Blood was everywhere, but it was from the cow, not the passengers. The boy with a stick led them to a small stable. Out of the storm, Milton dropped to his knees and began to pray. They sat in the dirt for a long time, watching the rain, hearing the wind, thinking of what could have been, saying nothing. Marco, the owner of the cow, appeared an hour later and began a heated discussion with JV and Milton about the value of the cow. "I'll pay for the creature," Nate said to JV. JV asked the man how much, then said, $100. "Does he take American Express?" Nate asked. But the humor missed its mark. "I'll pay it." He'd pay as much as that to stop Marco complaining. The deal was settled, and the man became their host. When he realized Nate was from the States, he sent for his wife and kids. They ate rice and black beans around a small table. The children sat on the floor beside the table, eating bread and rice, watching every move Nate made. Marco had a small boat with a motor. The Paraguay River was 5 hours away. Maybe he had enough gasoline, maybe he didn't. But it would be impossible to get there with all 3 men in the boat. JV had a plan. There was an army base on the edge of Corumba. When the sky cleared, Nate carefully unpacked the satellite phone and turned on the power. The signal was strong, and Marco and his family gathered around. He wondered if they'd ever seen a phone. JV called a friend who found phone numbers. He then explained the situation to an army officer and asked for help. After all, they had had a plane crash. Finally, the commander himself came to the phone. He and JV traded army talk for 5 minutes, places they'd been to, people they knew. Then JV explained what had happened. No problem. Hey. After Valdir hung up, Nate got up and moved slowly around the room. He saw the empty beer cans in the wastebasket. He would deal with that later. This was not a slide. He had nearly died yesterday, and that changed things. Every day was a gift now. Why not enjoy its pleasures? Just a little beer and wine, nothing stronger. Nate dressed and walked into town. The stores were locked, and the streets were empty. He went back to the park and looked down at the great Pantanal in front of him. Somewhere in the vast wetlands before him was Rachel Lane. She would soon be one of the richest women in the world. How would she react to the news of her good fortune? The possible answers made him uncomfortable. They had learned little about Rachel. Evelyn Cunningham, her mother, was from the small town of Delhi, Louisiana. When she was 19, she moved to Baton Rouge and found a job as a secretary in one of Troy Phelan's companies. She was a beautiful woman, and Troy spotted her during one of his visits from New York. Within a few months, Evelyn was pregnant. Troy's people arranged for Evelyn to go to a hospital in New Orleans, where Rachel was born in November 1954. Evelyn never saw her child. Troy arranged for the quick, private adoption of Rachel by a minister and his wife in Montana. Evelyn took $10,000 and returned to Delhi. She moved in with her parents, rarely left the house, and began to miss her daughter. She wrote letters to Troy, none of which were answered. As the years passed, Evelyn became more and more depressed. She killed herself on November 2nd, 1959, on Rachel's 5th birthday. She drove her parents' car to the edge of town and jumped off a bridge. Rachel was an only child. Her adoptive father, Mr. Lane, died when she was 17. Troy re-entered her life as she was finishing high school. Maybe he felt guilty. Maybe he was worried about her college education and how she would afford it. Rachel knew she was adopted, but had never shown an interest in her real parents. Troy met Rachel sometime in the summer of 1972. Chapter 6. Legal Challenges. Next morning, Javy drove to the river and parked near the water's edge. The Santa Laura hadn't moved. He was pleased to see that Welly had arrived. Welly wasn't yet 18, but claimed he could cook, pilot, guide, clean, and navigate. Javy knew he was lying. "Have you seen Mr. O'Reilly?" Javy asked. "The American? No sign of him." Javy drove downtown to the hotel to find Nate. The girl at the front desk hadn't seen Mr. O'Reilly. She phoned his room and no one answered. Javy persuaded her to give him the key. The door was locked but unchained, and Javy entered slowly. The first thing he noticed was the empty bed. Then he saw the bottles. One was empty, and the other half-filled. He saw a bare foot, then stepped closer to see Nate lying between the bed and the wall. Javy gently kicked his foot, and the leg moved. At least he wasn't dead. Javy pulled Nate up from the floor and rolled him onto the bed. His eyes were swollen and still closed, his hair wild, his breathing slow. "Nate!" Javy said loudly. "Speak to me!" No response. In the bathroom, he wet a towel with cold water, then wrapped it around Nate's neck. Nate opened his mouth in an effort to speak. "Where am I?" he said. his tongue thick and sticky. "In Brazil, in your hotel room. I'm alive, more or less." J.V. carried Nate into the bathroom, into the shower, where he fell onto the plastic floor. "I'm sorry," Nate said over and over again. J.V. left him there and went downstairs for a pot of strong coffee. It was almost 2 when Welly heard them coming. J.V. parked on the bank. There was no sign of the American. Then a head slowly lifted itself from inside the car. The eyes were covered with thick shades, and a cap was pulled as low as possible. J.V. walked to the passenger door and helped Mr. O'Reilly out. He looked very sick, with white skin that was wet with sweat, and he was too weak to walk alone. Nate slept for 4 hours, and the Santa Laura traveled slowly toward the north. The sun was beginning to fall behind the distant mountains of Bolivia. The air was light and much cooler. "The water is high," J.V. said. "We'll go much faster on the return." He pointed to a place on the map. "The first Indian village is in this area. It will take 2, maybe 3 days." Nate didn't care. Time had stopped. His watch was in his pocket. He'd cheated death, and so every day now was a gift. "Are you okay?" J.V. asked. "I'm fine. I feel good. This little trip will be good for me." There was a lot more J.V. wanted to ask, but Nate wasn't ready to talk. He went back to his hammock with the papers Josh had given him. He put insect repellent on his arms and legs, and began to read. The courtroom filled with members of the Phelan family and their lawyers. At 10 o'clock, Judge Wycliffe came in. The room was silent as he took his place at the front of the court. "Good morning," he said. Everyone smiled back. To his great satisfaction, the room was full. "Is everybody here?" he asked. "I need to identify everyone. The first papers were filed by Rex Phelan." Hark Geddes jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, I'm Hark Geddes," he said loudly. "I represent Mr. Rex Phelan." "Thank you. You may take your seat." Wycliffe went around the tables, taking the names of the heirs and their lawyers. 6 children, 3 ex-wives. Everyone was present. 22 lawyers, Wycliffe said to himself. "Do you have the will, Mr. Stafford?" he asked. Josh stood, holding a file. "I do." "You represented Troy Phelan," Wycliffe asked. "Did you prepare a will for him?" "I prepared several." "Did you prepare his last will?" There was a pause. It grew longer as the Phelans leaned closer. "No, I did not," Josh said slowly. The words were soft, but they cut through the air like thunder. The courtroom grew quiet. "Who prepared his last will and testament?" Wycliffe asked. "Mr. Phelan himself." "Oh, my God," Hark Geddes said, under his breath. The head of South American missions was a woman named Neva Collier. She'd spent 11 years working in the mountains of New Guinea, so she understood the challenges of the 900 people whose activities she organized. And she was the only person who knew that Rachel Porter had once been Rachel Lane, illegitimate daughter of Troy Phelan. After medical school, Rachel had changed her name to wipe out her past. She had no family. Both adoptive parents had died. She had only Troy, and she was desperate to remove him from her life. After completing the World Tribes training, Rachel had told her secrets to Neva Collier. Neva had promised never to tell anyone about Rachel. including where she was in South America. Sitting in her small, neat office in Houston, Neva read the extraordinary account of Mr. Phelan's will. She'd followed the story since the suicide. Communication with Rachel was slow. They exchanged mail twice a year, in March and August. Rachel usually called once a year from a payphone in Corumba when she went there for supplies. Neva had spoken to her the year before. Rachel's last vacation had been in 1992. She had no interest in the United States. It was not her home. She belonged with her people. The lawyers met at a hotel in a large room where the tables had been hastily put together in a perfect square. There were 50 people in the room. No Phelans were present, only their legal teams. Hark Geddes started the meeting. He suggested that each lawyer briefly state his or her ideas about the lawsuit. Grit, the lawyer hired by Mary Ross Phelan Jackman and her husband, stood and demanded war. "We must challenge the will. The old man was crazy. He jumped to his death, and he gave one of the world's great fortunes to an unknown heir. Sounds crazy to me. We can find psychiatrists who'll say he was crazy." "What about the 3 who examined him before he jumped?" someone said from across the table. "That was stupid," Grit said. "Phelan fooled you, and you guys fell for it." The head of the legal team for Gina and Cody Strong was a woman named Langhorne. She'd won Chapter 7, Alligators and Indians. Nate spent the morning reading. Javy joined him for coffee. "So, what do you think of the Pantanal?" he asked. "It's magnificent. Were you born here?" "I took my first breath in the hospital at Corumba, but I was born on these rivers. This is my home." "You told me your father was a river pilot." "Yes. When I was a small boy, I began going with him. Early in the morning, when everybody was asleep, he would allow me to take the wheel. I knew all the main rivers by the time I was 10. "And he died on the river?" "Not this, but the Takiri to the east. 5 years ago he was guiding a boat of Germans when a storm hit them. Only the deckhand lived." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "A lot of people want to destroy the Pantanal. Big companies that own big farms. They are clearing large sections of land for their crops. The soil is not good, so the companies use chemicals to grow crops, and the chemicals get into the water. They run into the rivers. The rivers eventually run into the Pantanal. Our fish swallow them and die." "Doesn't the government help?" Javy gave a bitter laugh. "Have you heard of Hidrovia?" "No." "It's a big ditch. It will be cut through the Pantanal to link Brazil, Bolivia, Paraguay, Argentina, and Uruguay. It is supposed to save South America, but it will drain the Pantanal, and our government supports it." Nate wanted to say something deep and serious about taking care of the environment. Then he remembered that his countrymen had destroyed large areas of the United States in the name of progress. "It's still beautiful," Nate said. "It is. Sometimes I think it's too big for them to destroy. There is a small trading post a few hours away. We should be there before dark. Fernando is the owner, and he hears everything on the river. Maybe he will know something about the missionaries." Javy emptied his coffee cup and stretched his arms. "Sometimes he has beer for sale. I think we should not buy any." He walked away. "Fine with me," thought Nate. A cold, brown bottle of beer, excellent beer. He began to sweat. When the Portuguese explorer Pedro Alvares Cabral first stepped on Brazilian soil in 1500, the country had 5 million Indians. After 5 centuries of European civilization, only 270,000 survived. It was a sick and violent history. If the Indians tried to live with the Europeans, they caught strange diseases and died. If they fought the Europeans, they were killed by weapons more deadly than poison arrows. They were the slaves of ranchers and rubber farmers. Men with guns drove them from their homes. Priests murdered them, and armies hunted them. Now the government was also the enemy. In 1967, the agency in charge of Indian affairs used chemical weapons to kill Indians. They gave the Indians clothing that was infected with diseases. Using airplanes and helicopters, they bombed Indian villages and land with poison gas. In the 1990s, the government wanted to open up the region to the north of the Pantanal, but the Indians were still in the way. The abuse of Indians was growing as ranchers pushed deep into the Amazon with the support of the government. Nate read this sad history for 4 hours, then went to drink coffee with Javy. "Do you have any Indian blood?" he asked. Javy smiled. "All of us have Indian blood. Why do you ask?" "I've been reading the history of the Indians in Brazil. It's pretty tragic." "It is. Do you think the Indians have been treated badly here?" "Of course they have." "What about in your country?" "Not much better, I'm afraid," Nate said. It wasn't a matter he wanted to discuss. It was still dark when the engine stopped and Nate woke up. Welly was loading the small boat. 3 large gas tanks were arranged neatly in the center of the boat. "These should give us 15 hours, Javy explained. "How far away is the settlement?" Nate asked. "I'm not sure." Javy packed a small tent, 2 blankets, 2 mosquito nets, some food and bottled water. The last item he packed was a large knife. "This is for the alligators," he said, laughing. Nate tried to ignore it. Nate took the copy of the will. 2 hours later, they entered a large lake, with more than a dozen little rivers twisting into it. Javy didn't know which one was the Cabitha. They saw a man fishing at the side of the lake. When they were a few meters away, Javy began talking to him. Finally, he said goodbye, and they paddled away. "His mother was Indian," Javy said. "There's a settlement a few hours from here." "A few hours?" "3, maybe." Nate moved lower in the boat and found a spot on the bottom between the box of food and the fuel tanks. The boat slowed. Engine trouble wasn't something he'd worried about. Suddenly, Nate was really scared. Then they were off again, the motor roaring as if nothing had happened. It became a routine. Every 20 minutes, just as Nate was falling asleep, the steady beat of the motor would stop. Javy played with the engine, then things would be fine for another 20 minutes. The first sign of the settlement came 7 hours after they left the Santa Lura. Nate saw a thin line of blue smoke rising above the trees near the foot of a hill. Javy was certain they were in Bolivia. The ground was higher, and they were close to the mountains. They came to a gap in the trees and saw 2 canoes. Javy guided the boat to the bank. Nate quickly jumped out, anxious to stretch his legs and feel the earth. "Stay close," Javy warned. Nate looked at him. Their eyes met, and Javy nodded toward the trees. An Indian was watching them. A male, brown-skinned, bare-chested, with a grass skirt hanging from his waist. No visible weapon. He had long black hair and red stripes on his forehead. He was very frightening. "Is he friendly?" Nate asked, without taking his eyes off the man. "I think so." "Does he speak Portuguese?" "I don't know." "Why don't you go find out?" "Relax." JV stepped from the boat. "He looks like he wants to eat you," he whispered. Nate wasn't amused. JV spoke to the Indian, but it was obvious he didn't speak Portuguese. He looked young, probably not 20. There was a movement behind the Indian. 3 of his tribesmen appeared. They weren't friendly folk. There were no smiles or hellos. A young female suddenly appeared from the trees and stood next to the first Indian. She, too, was brown and bare-chested. The Indians were Guateau, who preferred no contact with outsiders. They grew their food in small patches, fished the rivers, and hunted with bows and arrows. After an hour, JV smelled smoke. He climbed a tree near the boat, and Nate joined him. They could see the tops of 3 huts. Was he so close to Rachel Lane? Was she there now, listening to her people and deciding what to do? Would she send an Indian to bring them? Or would she simply walk through the wood and say hello? "What do you think they're doing?" he asked. "Talking. Just talking." "Well, we need to leave soon. We left the boat 8.5 hours ago. I'd like to see Welly before dark." "No problem. We'll go back with the current. And I know the way. It will be much faster." Back on the ground, Nate had settled into the boat to sleep when JV saw the Indians. They slowly approached the river behind their chief. He carried a long stick. It didn't appear sharp or dangerous. The chief directed his comments at JV. "Why are you here?" he asked in Portuguese. His face wasn't friendly, but he wasn't aggressive. "We are looking for an American missionary, a woman," JV explained. "We've come from Corumbá. This man is an American. He needs to find the woman." "Why does he need to find the woman? Is she in danger?" It was the first hint that the Indians might know of Rachel Lane. "No. She is not here." "Have you ever seen a woman missionary around here?" JV asked. At first there was no response. Then a slight nod. The man pointed somewhere off to the north and west. "She's with another tribe?" JV asked. "Guateau?" "Ipicas," the man said. "How far away?" "A day." JV opened 2 maps and spread them on the ground. The Indians were very curious. The chief told JV that they hadn't come in on the Cabita. They'd taken a wrong turn onto the River Guateau. JV whispered the news to Nate. Nate was worried. He was trusting JV with his life. The Indians talked among themselves. They couldn't agree on a route to get to the Ipicas. Finally, they turned again to JV. "There is a settlement of Ipicas at the edge of the mountains," JV translated. Chapter 8. The Missionary. Flo, Zadell, and Tyshan, the 3 psychiatrists who had declared Troy Phelan sane, were fired. New psychiatrists were found. Hark Geddes bought the first one at $300 an hour. The heirs couldn't pay high hourly fees to the lawyers, so the lawyers agreed to take percentages of the final settlements. Hark wanted 40%, but he and Rex finally agreed on 25%. Grit squeezed 25% out of Mary Ross Phelan Jackman. The winner was Wally Bright, who insisted on half of Libigale's settlement. None of the Phelan heirs asked if they were doing the right thing. They trusted their lawyers. No one could afford to be left out. Because Hark was the loudest of the Phelan lawyers, he caught the attention of Sneed. No one had noticed Sneed since the suicide. When the will was read, he was sitting in the courtroom, his face disguised with sunglasses and a hat. He'd left in tears. He hated the Phelan children because Troy hated them. Over the years, Sneed had been forced to do many unpleasant things to protect Troy from his families. And in return, Mr. Phelan left him nothing. Not a cent. Over the years, the old man had made many promises to take care of Sneed. He knew that he'd been named in one will. He'd seen the document himself. He would inherit $1 million when Mr. Phelan died. At the time, Mr. Phelan was worth $3 billion, and Sneed remembered thinking how small $1 million seemed. He'd occasionally asked about the matter, but Mr. Phelan had cursed him and threatened to cut him out completely. "You're as bad as my children," he'd said to poor Sneed. Somehow he'd gone from $1 million to $0, and he was bitter about it. He would join the enemies simply because he had no choice. He went to Hark Getty's office. The receptionist explained that Mr. Geddes was very busy. "So am I," Sneed replied rudely. "Give him this envelope, it's urgent. I'll wait for 10 minutes, then I'll walk down the street to the next law office." The envelope held a note that read, "I worked for Troy Phelan for 30 years. I know everything. Malcolm Sneed." Hark appeared immediately, took Sneed into a large office. At dawn, the current was strong, so they moved with it as the sun rose. The only sound was the rush of the water. "I guess we're lost, aren't we?" Nate said. "I know exactly where we are." "Where?" "We're in the Pantanal, and all rivers run to the Paraguay." Javy tried to start the motor. On the 5th pull, the motor caught and then died. "I'll die here," Nate said to himself. "I'll either drown, starve, or be eaten." To their surprise, they heard a shout. A kid of no more than 15 came toward them in a tiny canoe. A long, lazy conversation followed. "What's he saying?" Nate asked Javy. "He says the Indians are not far away." "How far?" 1 hour, maybe 2. "Can he take us there?" "He may want a few dollars." "Fine." The Phelan estate on one side of the table and this little kid on the other. $10, Javy said, after another brief discussion. "Okay." For $10, they would be delivered to Rachel Lane. They followed the boy in the canoe for 20 minutes, until they entered a small, shallow stream. It was almost 1 when they came to the higher ground. The boy seemed afraid to go further. "Just up there," he told Javy. Nate gave him the money, and they thanked him. The boy turned back with the current and disappeared quickly. The river ran into a forest where the trees hung low over the water. Nate felt as if they were being watched. He waited for an attack of deadly arrows by Indians dressed in war paint and trained to kill anyone with a white face. But they saw children first. Happy little brown bodies splashing in the water. The mothers were bathing, too. Javy stopped the engine and began talking and smiling. An older girl ran away toward the settlement. 3 men arrived within minutes. The oldest one said he spoke Javy's language. After a few minutes, Nate said, "Translation, please. What about the woman?" "Don't rush it. I'm still trying to persuade them not to burn you alive." More Indians arrived. Their huts were 100 meters away near the edge of the forest. A little boy studied Nate. Very softly he said, "Hello." Nate knew they were in the right place. No one else heard the boy. Nate leaned. The Indian stopped, but Rachel kept walking. She removed her hat. Her hair was brown and half-gray, and very short. She was 42 years old, but she looked younger. She didn't shake hands, nor did she give them her name. "My name is Nate O'Reilly. I'm an attorney from Washington." "And you?" she said to Javy. "I'm Javy Cardozo from Corumba. I'm his guide." She looked him up and down with a slight grin. The moment was not at all unpleasant for her. "What brings you here?" she asked. "I'm looking for Rachel Lane. My company has important legal business with her." "What kind of legal business?" "I can only tell her." "I'm not Rachel Lane. I'm sorry." Javy sighed and Nate's shoulders dropped. She saw every movement. "Are you hungry?" she asked them. They both nodded. She called the Indians. "Javy," she said, "go with these men into the village. They will feed you and give you enough food for Mr. O'Reilly." She sat with Nate on the bench and watched silently as the Indians took Javy to the village. He turned around once just to make sure Nate was okay. "Rachel Lane disappeared many years ago," the woman said, looking at the village in the distance. "I kept the name Rachel, but dropped the Lane. It must be serious or you wouldn't be here." She spoke softly and slowly. "Troy's dead. He killed himself 3 weeks ago." She lowered her head slightly, closed her eyes, and prayed. It was a brief prayer, followed by a long pause. Silence didn't bother her. "Did you know him?" she finally asked. "I met him once, years ago. No, I didn't know him." "Neither did I. He was my father, but he was always a stranger." "How did you find me?" "Troy tried to find you before he died, but couldn't. He knew you were a missionary with world tribes, and that you were in this part of the world. It became my job to find you. He had an awful lot of money. That's why I'm here. We need to talk business." "Troy left me something in his will?" "You could say that." "I don't want to talk business. I want to chat. I was with a patient just an hour ago when the boys came to tell—" Chapter 9. A Death. Next morning, Ayesh was walking in front of her mother when she felt the snake move under her bare foot. It struck below her ankle as she screamed. By the time her father got to her, she was in shock, and her right foot had doubled in size. A boy of 15, the fastest runner in the tribe, was sent to get Rachel. There were 4 poisonous snakes in their part of the Pantanal, and Rachel usually had the medicine to cure their bites. But she'd been unable to find the medicine for this type of snake during her last trip to Corumba. Ayesh was small and thin, and she'd probably die without medicine. Rachel prayed as she ran behind the boys. A group of Indians took Nate and Javy into the village, where the chief wanted to see them. His wife was preparing breakfast.